Hey guys, in today's video I bring you a truly impactful story that will shake all your beliefs. Let's meet Asher Lennox, a talented musician from Portland who, after a tragic accident, literally crossed the boundaries of life and death. What he discovered on the other side will shake all his convictions about the afterlife and religions. Are you prepared to hear what religions don't want you to know? So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for a revelation that will change your worldview forever. My name is Asher Lennox, and the story I'm about to tell has completely changed my perception of reality. I was born in 1948, and since I was young, music has been my passion. In 1977, at age 29, I was fronting a band in Portland, Oregon. We were known on the local scene, playing in bars and small concert halls. Music gave meaning to my existence, and I lived each day as if it were my last, immersed in melodies and chords that seemed to give voice to my soul. At that time, I felt invincible. The world felt like it was at my fingertips, and I believed our band was on the verge of stardom. The nights were filled with the sound of guitars, the pulse of drums, and that intoxicating feeling of being at the height of something great. Little did I know that destiny had other plans for me, plans that would go far beyond any dream of fame or musical success. Looking back, I realize how naive and limited my understanding of life and death was. I lived only for the present moment, without worrying about existential or spiritual issues. Religion never played a significant role in my life, and I considered deeply religious people to be somewhat deluded. Ironically, I was about to experience something that would challenge all of my previous beliefs and make me question everything I thought I knew about reality. It was on a cold December night in 1977 that my life changed forever. We had just played a show at a local bar, and I was walking back to my apartment across the Burnside Bridge. The freezing air cut into my face, but I barely felt it, still rocked by the adrenaline of the performance. The lights of the city reflected in the dark waters of the river below, creating an almost dreamlike scene. At that moment, I felt on top of the world, without imagining that in a matter of seconds, everything would fall apart. The sound of tires skidding on the asphalt was the first indication that something was wrong. I quickly turned around, only to see two headlights coming towards me at an alarming speed. Time seemed to slow down as my brain processed the impending danger. I tried to run, but my reflexes weren't fast enough. The impact was brutal. I felt my body being thrown into the air as if it weighed nothing. The pain was instant and overwhelming, as if every bone in my body was being crushed simultaneously. For a brief moment, I heard screams in the distance, probably from horrified witnesses. Then everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, something was deeply wrong. I could see my own body lying on the floor, motionless and contorted at an unnatural angle. It was a surreal sight, as if I were watching a film about my own death. The strangest thing, however, was that I no longer felt any pain. In fact, I felt absolutely nothing physical. I floated above the scene, watching the people crowding around my body. Some screamed for help, others seemed paralyzed by shock. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was okay, that I was somehow still there, but no sound was coming out of my mouth, or what I thought was my mouth. It was at that moment that I realized something extraordinary was happening. I was no longer tied to my physical body. It was as if my consciousness had expanded, freeing itself from the limitations of the flesh. I felt an indescribable lightness, a feeling of freedom that I had never experienced before. As I contemplated this new reality, I felt a gentle force pulling me. It wasn't down, back to my injured body, but up, towards something I couldn't fully understand. It was as if the entire universe was calling to me, inviting me to explore its deepest secrets. As I moved further away from the scene of the accident, the physical world became increasingly distant and hazy. The city lights, the sounds of approaching sirens, everything faded until I found myself immersed in an absolute void. It was then that I saw them for the first time, the monitors. Describing them is an almost impossible task, as they defied any earthly concept of form or appearance. They were like entities made of pure light, but not light that could be seen with physical eyes. It was a luminosity that emanated from within, a vibrant, pulsing energy that seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. Despite their ethereal nature, I felt an inexplicable familiarity with these entities. It was as if I had known them forever, as if they were part of me, and I was part of them. His presence was both majestic and comforting, inspiring a feeling of reverence and deep peace. The monitors surrounded me, and although they had no mouths or any physical apparatus to speak, I clearly heard a voice in my mind. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, resonating not in my ears but in every fiber of my being. "Do you trust us?" asked the voice. At that moment, I realized I was faced with a crucial choice. Part of me was still tied to the world I knew, to my life as Asher Lennox, the Portland musician. But another part, a part I barely knew, longed for something more, something beyond the limited existence I had experienced thus far. Without hesitation, I said yes. Not with words, but with my whole being. It was as if every particle of my existence vibrated in unison, affirming my trust in these luminous entities. The moment I made that choice, I felt a profound change. It was as if the last ties that tied me to the physical world had been severed. I was enveloped by an indescribable energy, and I began to move at a speed that defied all human comprehension. The monitors guided me through dimensions I didn't even know existed. We passed through veils of reality, each one more surprising than the last. I saw colors that have no name in our earthly language. I heard sounds that reverberated with the very essence of creation. As we advanced, I began to understand that the monitors were not just guides, but guardians of an ancient knowledge, of a universal truth that transcended any human concept of religion or spirituality. They were about to show me the true nature of existence, a reality that would challenge and transform everything I believed I knew about life, death, and the universe. As the monitors guided me through this new realm of existence, I felt my consciousness expanding in ways I never imagined possible. He was no longer just Asher Lennox, the 29-year-old musician from Portland. My identity began to dissolve, merging with something much larger and deeper. It was as if every mental barrier I had built throughout my earthly life was being torn down. Concepts that once seemed immutable, time, space, individuality, have lost their meaning. I became part of an infinite cosmic tapestry, where every thread was connected to every other in intricate and beautiful ways. In this expanded state, I could see the universe unfolding before me like a grand, eternal spectacle. Entire galaxies were born and died in a matter of seconds, or perhaps eons. Time no longer had meaning there. Stars exploded in supernovae, spreading the elements of life throughout the cosmos. Black holes devoured everything around them, only to give rise to new universes in other dimensions. The most surprising thing was that I could perceive all of this simultaneously. There was no limit to my perception. I could focus on a single atom and, in the next instant, contemplate the vastness of a cluster of galaxies. Every particle of the universe contained within itself the entirety of existence, like an infinite cosmic hologram. Amid this vastness, I began to understand the true nature of the soul. The monitors showed me that what we call self, our personality, our memories, our desires, is just the tip of the iceberg. Our true essence is much vaster and eternal. The soul is not something we possess, but something we are, a unique and individual expression of universal consciousness. I saw that all souls that have ever existed, that exist and that will still exist, are connected to this universal consciousness. There is no real separation between us, only the illusion of individuality that we experience during our physical lives. This revelation was both frightening and liberating. I realized that I was never truly alone, that every action, every thought, every emotion I ever had reverberated through all of existence. The monitors have guided me through countless lives, past, present, and future. I saw myself as a warrior in ancient Rome, as a mother in medieval China, as a child in the distant future on a planet that was not Earth. Each life was a new perspective, a new lesson, a new opportunity for growth and evolution. I then understood that death, as we know it on Earth, is just a transition. It is not the end, but a portal to new experiences, new learning. Physical life is like a school, where our souls come to learn specific lessons. Some of these lessons are difficult, others are joyful, but all are equally valuable for our spiritual evolution. As I absorbed these cosmic truths, I felt a deep peace settle within my being. All the worries, fears, and anxieties that I carried in my earthly life seemed insignificant compared to the grandeur and beauty of the universe. I was a tiny particle and, at the same time, an integral part of something infinitely vast and wonderful. As my journey with the monitors continued, I began to receive revelations that challenged everything I thought I knew about religion and spirituality. It was at that moment that I realized how much earthly religions, with all their doctrines and dogmas, are just limited glimpses of a much greater truth. The monitors showed me that the concept of heaven and hell as physical locations or permanent states is a gross simplification of spiritual reality. There is no supreme judge sitting on a heavenly throne, weighing our actions on a cosmic scale. Instead, I saw that it is we ourselves who create our heaven or hell through our choices and the state of our consciousness. I witnessed souls trapped in states of suffering, not because some deity had condemned them, but because they themselves could not free themselves from negative patterns of thought and emotion. I saw people who, even after physical death, continued to be trapped by resentments, fears, and hatred that they had nurtured during their lives. They created dark realities for themselves, reflections of their own mental states. On the other hand, I saw souls that radiated light and love, creating environments of indescribable beauty and harmony around them. These were not perfect or holy people by earthly religious standards. They were simply those who had learned to love unconditionally, to truly forgive, and to live at peace with themselves and others. The monitors revealed to me that spiritual evolution does not depend on following specific religious rules or belonging to a particular faith. What really matters is our ability to love, to grow, to learn from our experiences. Each soul follows its own unique path of evolution, and there is no right or wrong route. I understood that religions, at their essence, are human attempts to capture and explain spiritual truths that go far beyond our earthly understanding. Every religious tradition contains fragments of truth, but none has the complete truth. The disagreements between religions, which had so often led to conflicts and wars, seemed tragically insignificant in the face of the vastness of the spiritual reality that I was witnessing. The monitors showed me that the spiritual universe is infinitely more vast and complex than any religious doctrine has ever dared to teach. There are no real divisions between souls based on their earthly beliefs. Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, they are all part of the same spiritual family. They are all unique expressions of the same universal consciousness. I saw that concepts like karma and reincarnation have a basis in reality, but are much more complex and nuanced than generally believed. It's not about punishment or reward, but about opportunities to learn and grow. Every life, every experience, is a chance to expand our consciousness and our capacity to love. Perhaps the most surprising revelation was about the nature of the divine. The monitors showed me that what many religions call God is not a separate and distant being, but the very essence of existence. It is the universal consciousness of which we are all part. There is no real separation between the Creator and creation. We are all manifestations of this divine energy, exploring and experiencing existence in countless forms. This realization filled me with a sense of awe and humility. I realized that every being, every particle in the universe, is sacred in its own way. Divinity is not confined to temples or churches, but is present in every moment, in every interaction, in every breath. As I absorbed these truths, I felt a deep compassion for all humanity. I saw how we are all struggling to understand our existence, searching for meaning and purpose. Religions, with all their limitations, are sincere attempts to connect us with something greater. But true connection, I understood, comes not from dogma or rituals, but from unconditional love and the expansion of consciousness. As I floated in this state of expanded consciousness, guided by the monitors, I was struck by a series of vivid visions of the future. It was not a distant, hazy future, but concrete, detailed events that would shape the course of human history in the decades to come. The first vision I had was of a sunny day in New York. I saw two imposing towers against the blue sky. Suddenly, planes appeared, crashing into the structures in an explosion of fire and smoke. The horror and chaos that followed was palpable. People running through the streets, dust and ash covering everything. I knew, without anyone telling me, that I was witnessing the events of September 11th, 2001. The scene changed, and I found myself in a silent and empty world. Deserted streets, closed stores, people isolated in their homes. A feeling of fear and uncertainty hung in the air. I saw crowded hospitals, exhausted doctors and nurses fighting an invisible enemy. I realized I was seeing the effects of a global pandemic, what we would later know as COVID-19. These visions were disturbing, showing the suffering and challenges humanity would face. But the monitors assured me that these events, as painful as they were part of a larger plan of collective evolution. Then I was transported to a more distant future. I saw a transformed Earth, green and sustainable cities, people living in harmony with each other and with nature. Advanced technologies were used not for destruction, but to heal the planet and improve everyone's lives. I felt an energy of peace and cooperation that permeated everything. The monitors showed me that after periods of great turmoil and suffering, humanity would finally achieve a mass spiritual awakening. I saw 1,000 years of peace, where people would finally understand their true nature as spiritual beings, having a human experience. In this future, the old divisions of race, religion, and nationality had disappeared. People saw themselves as part of a single human family, connected not only to each other, but to all life in the universe. War had become a distant memory, and the planet's resources were shared equitably. I saw incredible scientific advances that would allow us to explore the stars, not as conquerors, but as peaceful explorers. Humanity had learned to communicate with other life forms, both on Earth and beyond, expanding our understanding of the cosmos and our place in it. The most impressive thing was that, in this future, people had developed abilities that today we would consider supernatural. Telepathy, energy healing, and the ability to manipulate matter with thought were common. These abilities were not seen as magical or mystical, but as a natural expression of our spiritual potential. The monitors explained to me that this future was not predetermined or inevitable. It was a potential, a path that humanity could choose to follow. The key to achieving this future was for each individual to make the conscious choice to live with love, compassion, and wisdom. As these visions of the future unfolded before me, I felt a mixture of hope and responsibility. I realized that each of us has a role to play in creating that better future. Every act of kindness, every conscious choice, every expansion of consciousness contributes to the collective evolution of humanity. After what felt like an eternity immersed in these cosmic revelations, I felt a sudden shift. The monitors, who had been my guides on this extraordinary journey, began to walk away. I felt a gentle but insistent force pulling me back. At first, I resisted. The peace and understanding I had experienced was so profound, so complete, that the idea of returning to the limitations of physical existence seemed almost unbearable. How could I go back after having glimpsed the vastness of the universe and the true nature of reality? But the prefects assured me that my time had not yet come. There was a purpose for my return, a mission I needed to fulfill. They reminded me that every life is precious, every experience an opportunity to grow and learn. As I was pulled back, I felt my consciousness twitching. It was as if all the expansion I had experienced was being compressed back into the confines of my physical being. The feeling was uncomfortable, almost painful. Suddenly, I was flooded with an avalanche of physical sensations. The pain from the accident, which had disappeared during my spiritual journey, returned with a vengeance. Every nerve in my body seemed to scream in protest. I opened my eyes with a desperate gasp for air. The bright light momentarily blinded me, and I heard agitated voices around me. Little by little, my vision adjusted, and I recognized familiar faces. Eli, my best friend, and Maggie, my ex-girlfriend, stood next to me, their faces a mix of relief and concern. "Ah, he's awake," cried Maggie, tears streaming down her face. Eli squeezed my hand, his voice shaking. "Man, you gave us quite a scare. We thought we lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. So many things I wanted to say, so many truths I had discovered, but I couldn't form the words. A medical team quickly entered the room, asking questions and checking my vitals. I heard words like a miracle and unexplainable recovery. Apparently, considering the severity of the accident, it was surprising that I was alive, let alone conscious and apparently without serious after-effects. As the doctors examined me, my mind was in a whirl. How could I explain what had happened? How could I convey the depth and magnitude of what I had experienced? The cosmic revelations that had filled my being now seemed distant, like a dream that slips through your fingers upon waking. In the days that followed, I underwent a series of exams and tests. The doctors were perplexed by my quick recovery. Physically, I was almost unharmed despite the violence of the accident, but I knew that the true transformation had occurred at a level that no medical test could detect. As I regained my strength, I began trying to share my experience. However, I soon realized that this would be much more difficult than I had imagined. Words seemed inadequate to describe the vastness and depth of what I had experienced. How to explain colors that do not exist in the visible spectrum? How to describe sensations that transcend the physical? Furthermore, I faced incredulity and skepticism from those around me. Maggie looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion as I talked about the monitors and the universal truths I had learned. Eli, ever the skeptic, gently suggested that perhaps I had suffered some kind of hallucination due to the trauma of the accident. It was then that I began to understand the real challenge that awaited me. I had returned with precious knowledge, but finding a way to share that knowledge with the world would be my greatest mission. In the months following my release from the hospital, I found myself struggling to readapt to normal life. The world that had once seemed so familiar to me now had an air of unreality. The everyday concerns of those around me, money, status, petty conflicts, seemed trivial in comparison to the cosmic truths I had glimpsed. Driven by a sense of urgency and purpose, I began sharing my experience with anyone who would listen. I spoke about the monitors, about the eternal nature of the soul, about the interconnectedness of all things. I tried to explain how religions, although well-intentioned, offered only partial glimpses of a much greater truth. People's reaction was mixed at best. Some listened with polite curiosity, others with open skepticism. Many simply looked at me as if I had lost my mind. My band, which was once the center of my life, began to drift away. They didn't know how to deal with the new Asher, who seemed more interested in philosophizing about the nature of reality than in writing songs and playing shows. Maggie, who had initially been so relieved by my recovery, now looked at me with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Asher," she said to me one day, "you need to stop this. You had a traumatic experience, I understand, but you need to move on. These stories about monitors and souls. People are starting to talk." Eli, my closest friend, tried to be more understanding, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Look, man," he told me after I had spent hours trying to explain to him the illusory nature of time, "maybe it would be a good idea for you to talk to someone. You know, a professional. They can help you process what happened in a more healthy way." His words, although well-intentioned, hurt me deeply. How could they not see? How could they reduce the most profound and transformative experience of my life to a mere hallucination or post-traumatic delirium? The situation came to a head when I was invited to speak at a local event about near-death experiences. Eager to finally have a platform to share my message, I prepared meticulously. On the day of the event, I spoke passionately about everything I had learned, about the nature of reality, about love as a fundamental force in the universe. The audience's reaction was shocking. Some laughed openly, others shook their heads in disbelief. One man even stood up and shouted, "Charlatan!" before leaving, slamming the door. After the talk, the event organizers politely apologized to me, but made it clear that I would not be invited again. This public rejection was devastating. I felt misunderstood, isolated. The truths that were so clear and profound to me seemed to be seen by others as madness or, at best, harmless fantasies. The culmination of this series of rejections came when my family, concerned about my erratic behavior, insisted that I seek psychiatric help. Reluctantly, but feeling I had no choice, I agreed to be evaluated. The psychiatrist listened patiently to me as I described my experience. When I finished, he looked at me with an expression that mixed compassion and professional concern. "Mr. Lennox," he said, "what you experienced is consistent with what we call a dissociative experience. It is a common response to severe trauma, such as the accident you were in. I believe a period of observation and treatment would be beneficial to you." So, against my will, I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 10 days. These were, without a doubt, the hardest days of my life. Surrounded by sterile white walls, watched constantly by nurses and doctors, I felt lonelier than ever. How could I explain that I wasn't crazy? That what I had experienced was more real than anything in this physical world? During my hospitalization, I underwent a series of tests and assessments. Doctors spoke in terms of delusions, hallucinations, and post-traumatic stress disorder. My every attempt to explain the depth and reality of my experience was seen as further evidence of my supposed mental condition. Paradoxically, it was during this period of forced isolation that I began to truly understand the challenge that lay ahead. I realized that the rejection I was facing wasn't personal. People were not ready to accept a vision of reality that so fundamentally challenged their beliefs and perceptions. I then remembered something that the monitors had shown me, that each soul follows its own path of evolution, in its own time. I couldn't force others to see what I had seen or to believe what I knew to be true. My task was not to convince, but simply to share, to plant seeds that might one day blossom. When I was finally released from the hospital, I left with new resolve. I knew I wasn't crazy. What he had experienced was more real and profound than anything this physical world could offer. But I also understood that I would need to find new ways to share my message, ways that wouldn't scare or alienate people. After my psychiatric hospital experience, I realized I needed to change my approach. I couldn't just go around proclaiming cosmic truths and expecting people to believe me. I needed to find a way to get my message across that was more subtle, more accessible. It was then that I turned to what had always been my passion: music. I realized that through songs I could express the truths I had learned in a way that touched people on a deeper level, beyond the intellect. I started composing feverishly. The melodies flowed through me like never before, charged with emotion and meaning. My lyrics spoke of universal love, of cosmic connection, of the eternal nature of the soul, but in a way that didn't sound preachy or alienating. At first, it was difficult. My old band had disbanded, and many in the local music scene viewed me with suspicion. But slowly I started to build a new fan base. People who resonated with the message in my songs, even if they didn't fully understand its origins. I started playing in small cafes and bars, then at local festivals. To my surprise, I found that my music was reaching people in a way that my direct words had never been able to. After shows, people would come up to me, often with tears in their eyes, to tell me how a specific song had deeply touched them or helped them get through a difficult time. I realized that I was fulfilling my mission in a way I had never imagined. I wasn't preaching or trying to convert anyone. I was simply sharing my truth through art, allowing each person to interpret and feel it in their own way. Over the years, my music evolved, as did my understanding of the experience I had lived through. I began studying philosophy, psychology, and various spiritual traditions. Not to validate what I knew to be true, but to find bridges between my experience and human knowledge accumulated over the centuries. I discovered that many of the truths that the monitors had shown me were reflected, in one form or another, in various mystical and philosophical traditions around the world. It gave me a new appreciation for humanity's ancient wisdom and helped me contextualize my own experience. I began giving occasional talks, no longer focused on convincing people of the reality of my near-death experience, but on exploring universal themes of love, compassion, and interconnection. He talked about the importance of expanding our consciousness, of seeing ourselves as part of something bigger. Over time, I was invited to participate in conferences on consciousness and spirituality. I met other people who had had similar experiences to mine. Although the details of our experiences were different, there were common themes that united us. A sense of oneness with the universe, an understanding of the illusory nature of time and space, an understanding of love as the fundamental force of existence. My mission became clear: to be a bridge between the physical and spiritual world, between the known and the unknown. I was not here to convert anyone or to proclaim absolute truths, but to inspire people to question, to explore, to seek their own truth. Over the years, I saw the seeds I had planted begin to germinate. People wrote to me to tell me how my music or my words had inspired them to meditate, to explore spiritual practices, to be more compassionate towards themselves and others. I also saw the changes in the world that the monitors had shown me begin to unfold: the 9/11 attack, the global pandemic, events that I had predicted but that still left me deeply shaken when they occurred. But I also saw signs of the great shift in consciousness that was coming. More and more people were awakening to a deeper understanding of reality. Science was beginning to explore areas that had previously been considered the exclusive domain of spirituality. Concepts like quantum interconnection and the illusory nature of time were becoming part of mainstream discourse. Although the path was not always easy, I felt deep gratitude for having been chosen for this mission. Every life touched, every mind opened, every heart expanded was confirmation that my return had a purpose. As I grow older, I feel like my journey is far from over. The mission entrusted to me is a life's work, perhaps of many lives. But I'm at peace with that. I know that I am just a small part of a great collective awakening, a grain of sand on the beach of universal consciousness. And so, I continue to sing, speak, write, live in a way that reflects the truths I have been shown. I continue to be a bridge, a beacon, a gentle reminder that we are all so much more than we think we are, that we are all, in our essence, eternal and infinite expressions of universal love. Now, almost 5 decades after that fateful night on the Burnside Bridge, I look back and see how my life was completely transformed by those brief moments outside my body. The journey was not easy. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness, of questioning. There were times when I wondered if it wouldn't have been easier to just forget, to go back to my old life as a carefree musician. But the truth is, even in the most difficult moments, I could never deny the reality of what I experienced, the feeling of expansion, of connection to the entire universe, the deep understanding of the nature of love and consciousness. These things are engraved in my soul in a way that no doubt or rejection can erase. Over the years, I saw the world change in ways that the monitors had shown me. I've seen tragedies unfold, like the 9/11 attack and the global pandemic. These events, although painful, served as reminders of the interconnectedness of all humanity and the need for compassion and mutual understanding. I also witnessed positive changes. I saw a growing interest in spirituality and expanded consciousness. I saw science begin to explore areas that were previously considered purely mystical. I saw people from all walks of life awakening to a deeper understanding of themselves and the universe. My music has evolved over the years, becoming a vehicle to convey the truths I have learned. Through melodies and lyrics, I tried to capture the essence of what I experienced, the beauty, the love, the interconnectedness of all things. And I was moved to see how these songs touched people in ways I never imagined possible. Looking to the future, I feel a mixture of hope and apprehension. The visions I have had of a global awakening of consciousness have not yet fully come to fruition, but I see signs that we are moving in that direction. I see more and more people questioning old paradigms, seeking a deeper understanding of themselves and the universe. I know the road ahead will not be easy. Humanity still faces monumental challenges: climate change, inequality, conflict. But I also know that we have within us the potential to overcome these challenges, the potential to create the future of peace and harmony that I was shown. My near-death experience taught me that death is not the end, but a transition. Therefore, I do not fear the day when I will leave this physical body again. I know this will be just the beginning of a new journey, a return to the vast ocean of consciousness of which we are all a part. In the meantime, I continue my mission. I continue sharing, inspiring, being a bridge between the physical and spiritual world. Every person who awakens to a deeper understanding of themselves and the universe is a victory. Every act of love and compassion is a step towards the future I saw. To those who read this story, my message is simple. You are more than you think you are. You are a unique and precious expression of universal consciousness. Your life has a purpose, even if you haven't discovered it yet. Cultivate love, expand your consciousness, seek the truth within yourself. And always remember, death is not the end. It's just a door to a reality bigger and more beautiful than we can imagine. Live each day with this understanding, and you will see the world transform before your eyes. My journey continues, as does yours. We are all travelers on this great cosmic adventure, all learning, growing, evolving. And in the end, when we look back on our lives, we will see that every moment, every challenge, every joy was part of a greater plan, a plan of infinite love and eternal evolution. May the peace and love I experienced on that fateful night be a reality for all of us here and now in this physical world. This is my hope, my prayer, my ongoing mission. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.